Bible, Daniel.
Okay, so we left off in chapter 10, and Daniel's just fallen to the ground. He's just wiped out. He's scared. The guys traveling with him have taken off. They've left. They were so scared. And then in verse 10 of chapter 10, a hand touches him. He's fallen and raises him back up. And then we look at verse 12. Then he said to me, "Do not be afraid." Yeah, right. And that's, when you really have an angelic or heavenly visitation like this, that's the common thing is do not be afraid. Why? Because, you're afraid and seeing something that's just really not your average sight. Daniel, he says, "Do not be afraid, Daniel, for from the first day that you set your heart on understanding this and on humbling yourself before your God, your words were heard, and I have come in response to your words." So here, Daniel's prayers are being answered. I mean, he humbled himself. He decided to fast and pray. I think at this time, Daniel was probably in his 80s. He had been in Babylon a long time. It's an older guy. He hasn't cut off all the food. I know what it's like in these older years. You just get weaker faster. I used to fast more with just cutting things out, and now it's like, I think I might need to nibble on a little something here and there. But anyway, so he didn't cut out everything, but he humbled himself before the Lord, and the heavenly messenger says, "I came in response to your words." In verse 13, an interesting scenario sets up. "But the prince of the kingdom of Persia was withstanding me for 21 days. Then behold, Michael, one of the chief princes, came to help me, for I had been left there with the kings of Persia." He's talking about a heavenly thing going on here. He's trying to come down and answer to the prayer. He heard it on the first day. It says, but these heavenly principalities, whatever, were strong enough, had enough influence to hold up the answer to Daniel's prayer for 21 days until Michael shows up, a chief prince. We're talking about Michael as an archangel, one of the highest, the chief prince. And he says, "I'd been left there with the kings of Persia." When he's talking about kings of Persia here, he's not talking about earthly kings. He's talking about heavenly powers. And we see once again this battle. And Persia is really strong. It's really strong in our day. That area of the world is a really strong influencer. And here, even with standing up against the prayers of Daniel for 21 days, until Michael comes along to rescue the messenger here, Gabriel, and get him through. So he got some help from Michael. So we're going to go on to verse 18 in chapter 10. It says, "Then this one with human appearance touched me again and strengthened me. And he said, 'O man of high esteem.'" Once again, Daniel's told his regard, his heavenly regard. That'd be nice to hear that from an angel or somebody. "Oh, man of high esteem," because who knows what Daniel thought about himself? Like, if I was a real man, I would have gotten up here and gone back to Jerusalem already. Who knows what he was thinking about? I've really failed in all of this. He could have some real self-doubt, but he hears from heaven that he's a man of high esteem. And it says, "Do not be afraid. Peace be with you. Take courage and be courageous." Now as he spoke to me, I received strength and said, "May my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me." Then he said, "Do you understand why I've come to you? But I shall now return to fight against the prince of Persia. So I'm going forth, and behold, the prince of Greece is about to come." Here's these two, and it's Javan there. It's not technically Greece, but the prince of Persia, the prince of Greece. These areas are basically areas that, we see significance. I even saw a little report the other day of the president of Turkey meeting with the leader of Iran and meeting with the leader of Russia. To me, that starts to be an alliance that looks more like the book of Daniel in reality, that there's starting to be some of these figures coming together. The prince of Persia, the prince of Greece are usually coming against each other. I'd say when they come into some kind of alliance, that's a time to start looking around, because apparently they're starting to have enough peace with each other to come against a common force, which would likely be Israel, the Jewish people, and then ultimately God's people everywhere. But anyway, it says, so in verse 21 it says, "However, I will tell you what is inscribed in the writing of truth. Yet there is no one who stands firmly with me against these forces except Michael, your prince." Here Michael's brought up again. Michael's introduced to us here as he's the one that stands for the nation of Israel. We're seeing these others. There are other princes standing for these other nations. Michael is named as the prince that stands for Israel in the heavenly places. And so, we're seeing this vision once again. So we're going to move into chapter 11. And it says in verse 1, "And in the first year of Darius the Mede I arose to be an encouragement and a protection to him. And I will tell you the truth, behold, 3 more kings are going to arise in Persia, then a 4th will gain." And so he goes on and begins to explain once again some details. And what we find through most of chapter 11, I think most scholars or interpreters of the Bible here would say that most of the details of the first part of chapter 11 can be seen in history in the era of Alexander the Great and those that followed him and all the conflict that was in that area. And so I don't know how to sort that all out. I've really not spent that much time. Some people have. You can look into various writings about that. But in the midst of this prophecy, it seems like it transitions. And it goes from that time, and once again, it comes into the end of times. And I'm going to start reading some of that seems to be involved with that. In verse 31, it seems like the transition is coming. And we keep seeing it's at the end of the age, it's at the latter days, at the very end. You see those comments throughout the book of Daniel when it comes to these sections. And here it says, verse 31, "And forces from him will arise, desecrate the sanctuary." Now, this is a leader called the leader of the north. And a lot of people would interpret that to be, once again, the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, the one we usually call Antichrist as we're looking at the New Testament. "And he'll desecrate the sanctuary fortress and do away with the regular sacrifice, and they will set up the abomination of desolation." Here we see that term again, the abomination of desolation. And so we say that there's this destruction that's coming against Jerusalem, and the regular sacrifice is stopped. He's going to do away with it. Well, we see the sacrifices were started, and 2,300 days will come for the restoration of the temple from that point. Well, here, all of a sudden, the regular sacrifice is stopped. And it says in verse 32, "And by smooth words he will turn to godlessness those who act wickedly toward the covenant. But the people who know their God will display strength and take action." So he's going to be a smooth talker, and he's going to turn people to godlessness. He's going to turn people against the people of the covenant with God. But he says those who know their God will display strength and take action. So there's going to be some activity taking on, God's people really standing up and doing some incredible things while there's this incredible oppression on the earth like there's never been before. And it says in verse 33, "And those who have insight among the people will give understanding to the many. Yet they will fall by the sword and by the flame, by captivity and by plunder for many days." So here it says there's going to be people that have insight, and they're going to give understanding. And I think part of that insight is going to be, we've really looked into the book of Daniel. We've looked at the days, the time sequences. We've looked at the players involved in the sequence, and we understand that, hey, we're moving in towards the end of the age, and this scenario is being played out. And so we can give understanding to those who would be questioning, say, what's going on? We say, well, it won't be long. There's conflict going on, and we need to stand, because we can still do exploits. We can still do mighty things in the name of the Lord in these days and help the people to stand. Verse 34 says, "Now when they fall, they will be granted a little help, and many will join with them in hypocrisy. And some of those," he's talking about the ones that kind of fall away, "and some of those who have insight will fall in order to refine, purge, and make them pure until the end time, because it is still to come at the appointed time." So we see this time of the revelation of the abomination of desolation. And what's happening during this time is some are falling away. We see that in the New Testament, that Paul said, the day of the Lord will not come until the man of lawlessness appears, the one who brings in this abomination of desolation, and there's a great falling away. And we see, I think both of those are described here for one of the first times in the Scriptures pretty clearly in chapter 11 of Daniel. And it says in verse 36, "Then the king will do as he pleases, and he will exalt and magnify himself above every god, and will speak monstrous things against the God of gods, and he will prosper until the indignation is finished, for that which is decreed will be done."